Hello, ladies and gents, and welcome back to what is, I think, going to be the second video or the second installment or segment of our first unit for 11th grade, the various texts unit. Now, the next thing that we're going to look at, or rather the first thing we're going to look at, I should say, right, this is the first video, uh, is going to be on mythology, right? We like to start with mythology pretty frequently in my classes, if you haven't kind of caught on to that already. Now, the myths that we're going to start with are two in particular, really. And those are, or start, I should say, start and end with, because we're just going to do a little bit of it. So if you really, really don't like Greek mythology or mythology in general, that's fine. We're going to kind of move rather quickly through it. However, we still will include it, and we'll talk about why again. We're going to read really quickly the myth of Eros and Psyche, and then we're going to read a very brief myth about Narcissus, about a guy named Narcissus. So what are we doing here? We're going to explore this genre very quickly, and just to kind of familiarize yourself with it and to establish a couple different things, a couple different features of literature as we do this. Now, the purpose here, or one of the purposes of this assignment, is to get us to reflect on these 5 questions. I don't want to look at them too in depth right now. I like to read and discuss and then go back and look at the questions, right? I like to kind of absorb and see what we can get out of it at first. So what can we say about mythology? What is it that we want to start with here? Remember that we want to explore, yes, the titles and perhaps the authors if we're able to, but in this situation, it's probably going to behoove us more to look at the genre. So the genre of mythology. Probably now in 11th grade, it's relatively familiar to you, especially if you've been following with me for a couple classes now. What mythology is, what it's all about. Myth is it is a fiction genre. So it's within the fiction category. And it is a very, very ancient, extremely old type of genre, wherein we are telling a fantastical story with supernatural elements, typically within something very close to or very directly like our real world setting. So the typical example, of course, is the Greek myths take place in ancient Greece. The Roman myths, the Babylonian myths, they take place in their respective countries or their respective lands. So those are some basic elements. We're also going to, of course, when I say supernatural elements, I say that you're going to see, gods, goddesses, demigods, ghosts, all this kind of stuff. You're going to see fantastical elements too. You're going to see creatures of a fantastical nature, be they dragons, chimeras, hydras, dryads, naiads, all this kind of crazy stuff. Okay. Now, one of the typical responses that I get when I prod my students, of course, about, what is mythology? How do we understand mythology? Is, of course, they say, oh, it's fake stuff, right? It's stuff that's not true, right? It's fictional at the very kindest is what they would say. And of course, this is something that I have said in the past, in past videos or past lessons, that I don't really like to linger on that sort of a definition. I don't like that. I think that it's a little bit too narrow to simply categorize literature and art in terms of what was true and what is not, because of course that brings up the whole question of what do we mean by true? And if by true you mean things that are observably, scientifically verifiable in reality and history, then of course these are not entirely true. If you mean true in the sense that they are expressing something that is accurate about the world and about us and about our nature and about our lives, okay, now that I would agree, or that I would disagree with if we're going to say that these were untrue. I think that myths, very much like Joseph Campbell has said, myths are a metaphor for the experience of life. And so when we read myths, I want us to not simply sit back and look at them as some crazy, a trippy dream that someone's writing down. I want us to look at them as, yes, fantastical tales that can delight and entertain us. And I hope that they do, and they probably should. That's one of their, highest and most delightful roles. But that they also instruct us in some way, shape, or form. I've talked about this quite a bit, where we should look at these stories as, in some sense, guides and wisdom that has been passed down to us about the worlds that we are experiencing. Okay, that's myth, really quick. Now, let's look at our two stories. We got Eros and Psyche, Narcissus. Let's start with Narcissus, actually. Okay, I like to begin with him first. So we're going to scroll down over here. So here we go. according to canon, Aminius, a young man, fell in love with Narcissus, who had already spurned his male suitors. Aminius was also spurned by Narcissus, who gave the unfortunate young man a sword. Aminius killed himself at Narcissus's doorstep, praying to the gods to give Narcissus a lesson for all the pain he had provoked. So, a couple things. Even if we don't know Narcissus's story, even if we don't know what the term narcissist means, we can see most of the answers to that question in this opening paragraph here. We start with Aminius, young man. He falls in love with Narcissus. Okay? And Narcissus is typically described as a distinctly attractive young man. Okay? He is, 15 out of 10 gorgeous. He looks like something that's AI generated, like something that's not even real. He's just amazingly beautiful. Okay? And we get something here. Aminius's love for Narcissus. And then we have this idea that Narcissus has spurned his male suitors, that is, plural. So men have tried to get with Narcissus romantically, okay? And he's spurning them. What does that mean? To spurn someone, to insult someone, to reject someone. I think it's a little bit more than that, though, because I think that the author could have simply just said, oh, he rejected them. Okay? Which, sure, whatever. That's romance, that's life for you. But he says spurned. I think there's a level of insult that has been done here. And I think, again, maybe it's my modern sentimentality with it, but I can't help but think of something like what we would call ghosting nowadays, right? I think that there's some, deeper insult that Narcissus has done to these men that he has been romantically involved with at some degree, where he has spurned them, right? He's done them harm. He's done them wrong in some way, shape, or form. And because of his nature, as we're going to see, I think that that's strongly what is implied, that he has kind of allowed these people to have a romantic connection with him, but then has not returned their affections, or has basically kind of disregarded their affections and their feelings, and just gotten out of them what it is that he wants, essentially, or something to that degree. Okay. Now, he does this apparently, as it says, to Aminius as well. And Narcissus has given him a sword. Again, just whatever. Like we know that there was a sword involved. Maybe, they were friends or whatever, exchanging gifts. Sure. Okay. One of the gifts was a sword. Now, he spurns him. He does the same thing that he's done to these other men. Except this time, Aminius, so heartbroken, or should we say so distraught, so disturbed by what Narcissus has done to him, turns around and commits suicide on Narcissus's doorstep, okay? Passionate sort of suicide of despair, right? And he prays as he does so that the gods teach this guy a lesson for all the pain that he had caused, okay? So what do we learn here about Narcissus? As the name implies, he is a narcissist, which means what? He is someone who only thinks about himself and who only thinks through himself in some sense. And what I mean by that is that he only thinks about things in terms of how can they serve him, or what do they have to do with him, basically. He's entirely self-centered. So the manner in which he loves, or the manner in which he engages with people romantically, is very, very dysfunctional, because look at what he is doing to people. He's doing nothing but spurning them. He is only thinking about himself in these romantic interactions, and thus dealing insult and emotional harm to these guys. Okay, so the prayer goes out. Let's read this. Narcissus was once walking by a lake or a river and decided to drink some water. He saw his reflection in the water and was surprised by the beauty he saw. He became entranced by the reflection of himself. He could not obtain the object of his desire, though, and he died at the banks of the river or lake from his sorrow. Okay. So we have this disjointed kind of narrative here where we have Aminius's kind of revenge prayer, or his justice prayer. And then we jump right to Narcissus by the river, famously, right? We have that famous image of him by the river. So if we actually look up Narcissus painting, right, you can kind of see pretty quickly. Yeah, that's one of the most famous ones. The one that I personally like the most, let's see if we can find it, is this one right here, okay? So we can get the full picture of it. It's such a good painting. Yes, this one right here. So I think this is Narcissus and Echo, which if you want to get the fuller version of Narcissus' story with Echo and everybody, go check out Ovid's Metamorphosis. It's in there. Now, here he is. He sees his reflection and he's entranced by it. Now, of course, you ask, what, have you never seen your reflection before? Is this the way that the gods are kind of dealing out justice to Narcissus? They're causing him to be entranced by his reflection, by his image? Maybe. Either way, I don't think it really fundamentally matters, because what happens is that he is so sorrowful that he can't, find the object of his desire, can't attain the object of his desire, that he dies of sorrow right there on the bank. And of course, the last line of the story goes that tells us that he is admiring himself in the underworld, looking at the waters of the Styx, okay, the waters of death, right? So that's Narcissus, okay? Very clearly, demonstrating why we use the term narcissist to describe someone who is self-centered, guys, who is self-obsessed and who only fundamentally loves themselves, okay? Speaking of love, though, let's read the second myth, which is the myth of Eros and Psyche. Now, a little bit longer, but we can move through it pretty quickly. So, line 1, living her ordinary life, Psyche became famous for her beauty that the whole world rushed to see. Okay, became famous because of her beauty, the whole world rushed to see. Cool. So I get a girl, mortal girl. Her name is Psyche, okay, which means I think either soul or mind, right? And she is so beautiful, stunningly. Everybody wants to see her. Okay, fine. Being jealous due to men's admiration of Psyche, goddess Aphrodite asked her son, the powerful master of love, Eros, to poison men's souls in order to kill off their desire for Psyche. But Eros fell in love with Psyche and was completely mesmerized by her beauty. Okay, so we have the jealousy of the gods, right? We have, once again, the kind of duality of the gods' nature, the duality of nature, the duality of reality here. That we can give blessings, we can get blessings, but there's also some serious consequences of rising too high, right? To be like the gods or be compared to the gods. And so we have, of course, the goddess Aphrodite, the one who is particularly jealous of people who are more beautiful than her or threaten her sense of beauty, appearing here and having a serious problem with Psyche. Okay. Now, a good note that I like this particular text points out is that Aphrodite is not the goddess of love. She is the goddess of beauty. She's the goddess of voluptuousness, the goddess of adultery and sexuality and all this kind of stuff. Not love. That is her son, Eros, who you and I probably know as Cupid. So she sends Eros to go and kill off people's desires for Psyche. It doesn't work. He falls in love with her. Okay, there's something that's just inherently so beautiful about her that even the god, falls for her. Okay. Eros guided Apollo to give the oracle that Psyche would marry an ugly beast whose face she would never be able to see, and he would wait for her at the top of a mountain. Okay. A couple things. Number one, we have a really interesting scene here where a god apparently is legitimately falling in love with a human being. That is particularly rare in some sense in Greek mythology. I say rare with a little hesitation because we might confuse stories of gods, having sex with mortals as the same thing. It's not necessarily, okay? This is one of the only stories we get where a god, is in love with a mortal to such a degree that he or she wants to be with that person forever, okay? It seems to be like legitimate fundamental love. And so what does he do? He of course doesn't want to openly love her, want to go after her, because of course his mother, would see and know that, and that would really, really be a bad day probably for both of them. So what does he do? He tells Apollo, the god of prophecy, yeah, let's organize the situation as follows. Let me marry Psyche incognito, if you want, and let me be with her incognito, but so that we would not basically, incur the wrath of my mother. So he, basically organizes this, and her parents, as it says here, were hoping for. On the contrary, they were very devastated. They were completely devastated, as their daughter was not supposed to have such a fate. But they decided to go on and arrange the wedding of their beloved daughter with the beast. Okay, so her daughter marries the beast. After the wedding, Psyche was able to be with her husband only at night. His tenderness and the enormous love he showed to her made Psyche happy and fulfilled beyond her expectations and dreams. She talked about her happiness with her sisters and confided to them how sad she was that she couldn't see his face. Okay, beautiful, famous scene, right? This wedding night, right? The night that they're going to consummate their marriage. They are together in intimacy, both sexual, physical, emotional, all this kind of stuff. And he is described as a beast, and she's afraid of this, right? And yet he is the most tender, the most romantic, the best lover, probably, that she ever could have imagined. And she's in love with him, and she's blissfully happy with him. Okay. Now, what is this? What happens now? She tells her sisters, and what? They persuade her that her lover is not only an ugly beast, but also a monster who will eventually kill her. So she should kill him first to save herself. Okay. Sisters are jealous, right? They don't want to have their younger sister having all the fun. Sure. Typical toxic femininity, if you want to call it that, right? This jealousy, this envy, for someone else's relationship, of course. Now, famous scene again. With the oil lamp and knife in her hand, Psyche, one night, was ready for murder. But when she enlightened the face of her beast husband, she saw the beautiful god Eros. Caught by surprise, she spilled the oil on his face. Eros woke up and flew away, telling Psyche that she betrayed him and ruined their relationship so they could never be united again. So, famous scene here. Famous scene. She goes in, she breaks the promise, she breaks the conditions of the marriage, betrays his trust in that sense, and uncovers his secret, basically. And they have to break up as a result because he can't be with her now because of his mother, because of fear of his mother. There's also, as is implied, some sense of betrayal here. And so how is this going to be resolved? Well, Psyche, it says, started searching for her lost love and finally was suggested to beg Aphrodite, who imprisoned Eros in the palace that they had lived in. To see him, Aphrodite gave her 3 impossible tasks to accomplish in order to prove her love. Okay, 3 tasks, you can do this, which of course you won't, because that's mom's, point. That's why she's giving her these tasks. And if you do so, you can be back with Eros again. So what are the tasks? Well, let's take a look. Driven by her desire to unite with Eros, she was fearless. She accomplished the first 2 tasks, whatever they were, go look them up for the more detailed points. But they're very Snow White-ish, let's put it that way. Psyche then had to go to Hades, the underworld, and bring the box with the elixir of beauty to Aphrodite, who ordered her not to open the box. Instead of the elixir, there was Morpheus, the god of sleep and dreams, hiding in the box. And when the curious Psyche opened it, she fell asleep. Okay, very typical move here. We have a task that involves going down to the underworld, right? Very, very frequent motif in Greek mythology. You have to descend into the underworld, into Hades. And this image of a box, that you can't open. Of course, to our fans of Greek mythology, that will sound like Pandora. Sure. She opens it, just like Lot's wife in the Bible. And looking back, right? She looks back. She once again, cannot contain her curiosity, and she is cast into sleep. Eros finds out what happens. He runs away from the palace, begs Zeus, the king of all the gods, to save Psyche. and amazed by their love, Zeus is going to go even further, as it says. He made Psyche immortal so that the two lovers could be together forever. Okay. And of course, if we look up Eros and Psyche paintings, we can see that that scene is particularly famous, particularly well depicted. We have, of course, the lamp and the lantern, but this painting right here, I have this painting in my bedroom, actually. It's been all over my family's houses for quite a while. It's a very famous picture of the ascension, if you want, of Eros and Psyche and their happily ever after. Okay, so what is going on here? Let's talk about this. First and foremost, number one, identify at least 3 familiar story tropes in these myths that you recognize from other stories you have seen or read. So, tropes. Tropes are plot points or plot elements that are not the basic structure of plot elements and like climax and denouement and all this kind of stuff, but they're things that happen within a story that are relatively specific that we see kind of repeating again and again and again. So, for example, one that I noticed right away was the presence of something like karmic justice, right? Like some kind of karmic justice that someone like Narcissus, endures. So we have something that's very much akin to the stories of Nemesis, right? The Greek god Nemesis, of this idea where whatever you are sowing in the world is going to be reaped in negativity, is going to come back and hurt you in some way, shape, or form. I saw that in Narcissus and in the way that he is suffering, right? So there's this idea of the fitting end, the trope of the kind of poetically just end to somebody, right? It's on your own sword that you're going to fall, right? That you've harmed other people with, it's going to harm you now. So yeah, that's a trope. The trope of there being divine love or a kind of forbidden love between two people. Now, those are two different tropes. So divine love, the idea of a god falling in love with humanity or a human being, of course, is a very familiar trope to us in a very Christian community, because that essentially is the story of Christianity, the story of God's love affair with humanity. Sure. There's also the story, of course, of the forbidden love, whether it's in Pyramus and Thisbe, or it's in Romeo and Juliet, or West Side Story, or whatever you want. We have this forbiddenness love that we're trying to overcome, right? The idea of the jealous sisters and the jealous stepmother, if you want, right? The idea of a jealous individual who's trying to kind of take away your happiness. That absolutely is a trope that we see repeated here pretty clearly. Now, I think you could also say this notion, two things, this element of having to complete tasks to achieve a major goal, right? To have distinct tasks that are being set up and meaning to be impossible, by the way. They're meant to be impossible. I'm thinking of Hercules, right? That Eurystheus gives him. He gives him these tasks that you just can't fathom, that you could actually do them. And then I think of, like, if you want a really deep cut, I'm thinking of a story like Baron and Luthien, somebody giving you a task with the full intention of knowing that you couldn't do it. But of course, someone, the person in that story is able to succeed and actually do it. So, okay. One more trope, I would say, and that is the trope of the, is there one or two more? The underworld, I think, is one. The trope of having to kind of go or descend into an underworld, or descend through death almost, or the afterlife. Of course, in Greek mythology, this is very famous. You could say this is famous in a religious sense too, right? The harrowing of hell. You could say that this is very much like Dante in the Divine Comedy, descending into hell and having to reemerge. This is very similar. And you could also say, I think that just to throw, I have to throw this one in as a fairy tale and a Tolkien fan, that there is a eucatastrophe at the end. What is a eucatastrophe, says you? A eucatastrophe is a sudden, unexpected, predictable, happy ending beyond what we would have hoped, right? So we were hoping that just Eros and Psyche could maybe meet each other again, and we could maybe get back to each other again. And yet, what do we see here? Actually, no, it's much better. They are together forever, happily ever after. That's what a eucatastrophe is. It's a sudden, unexpected, happy ending. Okay. Number two, who is Narcissus harmful to, and what does this suggest about the nature of excessive self-love and obsession? He is harmful, number one, to everyone around him. Okay, anyone who's interested in him, he's going to harm, because he's going to kind of just suck up their affection and not give them anything in return. We could also say that he is harmful to himself, therefore. He is depriving himself of camaraderie, friendship, and affection. And so he, therefore, also is suffering because he's not actually allowing himself to grow in love. So, yeah, he's harmful to everyone, basically, himself included. And this, of course, shows us that, guys and gals, if you practice in any way, shape, or form, the traits of a narcissist, the traits of narcissism and arrogance and all this kind of stuff, it will undoubtedly lead you down a deeply self-destructive and miserable road in life. Okay, it's a really, really obvious point that I constantly try to remind my students of, which is that some of the worst fates you could imagine emerge from being a narcissist, okay? From being a person who effectively will be at the end of their life and have nobody who desires to be around them anymore, has no real love or friendship, and is entirely alone in some sense, okay? So number 3, identify the most prevalent vice or sin in this story. It should be like these stories, by the way, in these stories, and explain how it plays a role in causing conflict for the protagonists. Okay, a couple things. The vices, right? The sins, that's all that vice really means, it's the opposite of virtue. So what are the sins we see here? We see, of course, arrogance. We see, you can call it arrogance, you can call it pride, you can call it self-focus, solipsism, whatever you want to call it. I'll just call it pride to make our lives simpler, you know? Narcissus's pride, very much on display here. You can say to some degree the pride or the vanity, right? The jealousy of someone like Aphrodite is on display. Yes, I just said a god has a flaw. Hopefully I'm not going to get struck down. And what else? You also see the same thing in Psyche's sisters, okay? So what else? You also see, I think, an element of breaking of trust, if that's it, right? Unfaithfulness. You kind of see it almost in every character here, though. You see it, obviously, I think it's implied in Narcissus with that whole spurning language. You also see it, I think, in what's it called? In Eros, believe it or not, from the beginning. He tries to be deceitful. He tries to cover up a part of himself. He tries to not tell his wife or his beloved and then wife the full truth about himself, causing the conflict of the story. And I think Psyche as well was also distrustful and unfaithful to her husband, right? She didn't believe him. Her experience, all of her experience told her that this guy is legit, is the real deal, but she chose to believe the suspicions of her sisters, okay? How did these cause problems? We just discussed this, okay? This, of course, caused the major conflicts in the story. That's where they all stem from, is our inherent flaws. Number 4, what does this myth, what do these myths, okay, forgive my editing, okay? What do these myths warn readers about? How can we see the dangers of this in our lives, even to the day? The danger of narcissism, the danger of distrust, of unfaithfulness, ladies and gents. Those are kind of the big warning signs that I at least notice here. So they're warning us. Don't focus on loving only yourself at the expense of others. Okay? You will be left without I'll say the greatest, without the greatest source of joy in the world. Okay, you will be left without that if you focus solely on loving yourself. Okay, how can we see the danger of this in our lives today? You know, kids, always give me a bunch of different examples. You tell me, do you see a lot of narcissism around the world today? Every high school kid wants to say, oh yeah, my dad or my mom is a narcissist. Yeah, sure. But where else do you see it? Maybe in yourself, dare we say? Do we see it in people that you idolize? Do we see it in the culture that you, engage with? Perhaps. Do we see distrust and unfaithfulness? As a teacher, I certainly do, because I constantly am hearing stories about, so-and-so cheated on so-and-so, cheated on so-and-so. And it was shocking to me of how unfaithful people can be, even outside of teaching, even in my personal life, right? It's amazing how many people think that they can get away with or choose to try to get away with something as atrocious as cheating. Now, what else? I think that's good for that. Okay, that's a pretty good one for where we see these dangers. Number 5, last but not least, of course. If we are to understand these myths as what? As a metaphor for some aspects of life, or a metaphor for the experience of life, what is what are they, right? What are they telling us that we must do or go through in order to attain joy and love? Couple things. First of all, you need to go through a denial of yourself. Okay, you need to drop the narcissism, drop the self-focus. Needs to be gone, right? You need to look outside yourself for love. I have a poster in my classroom here that reads from the lines of the Jefferson Airplane, "Somebody to love." When the truth is found to be lies, and all the when the truth is found to be lies, and all the joy within you dies, don't you want somebody to love, et cetera, et cetera? You'd better find someone to love. In other words, we need to very much, in order to find that joy and happiness in life, we need to look outside of ourselves. We need to love people in the external world. Okay. Now, what else is this kind of telling us? What else is this warning us about? Our actions and our treatment of others have some serious consequences, right? Like Narcissus didn't understand. You know, you can't treat people like objects and expect them to want to be with you in any meaningful way. And also, you can't expect that that's going to be good for them in any way, shape, or form, and that might be incredibly destructive for them, actually. Okay. And then with Eros and Psyche, I think one of the major points there is that love, in that romantic sense, is not going to be gotten without true honesty, openness, and determination, right? So it takes a lot of work, going to have to suffer in order to get it, probably. And you need to tell the truth. Okay. You need to be honest and faithful and trusting with each other. So virtue, wisdom, hard work, and honesty are what are going to bring you into that world of joy and love. Okay. So that's mythology for this year. You know, that's our quick look at mythology. So next, we're going to look at poetry. Okay, we're going to shift gears a little bit into poetry, but as you'll see, the poems we're going to look at are also, in some sense, love stories. Okay, so if you hate poetry, that's cool, that's fine, I understand, but just know that we're going to only read 2 for this year, probably. Okay, then we're going to be done and move on into our first big unit. Alrighty, I will see you next time. Have a fantastic day. Bye.